What's going on, Summoners, and welcome back to another episode of ProGuides OP Pick or Ban, now on patch 11.2. These are the champions that are a bit overtuned for one reason or another, so they have the power to affect your games more than they otherwise should. So in light of that, you'll either want to deny their existence altogether, or more likely, secure them for your own team. So let's get into it.
Starting things off in the top lane, we have Cho'Gath. Cho has been slowly rising up the ranks in the last few patches, and with small changes here and there to other champs, he's finally made it to the top spot. He's one of the few champions that actually prefers Frostfire Gauntlet over Sunfire Aegis as his standard mythic of choice, since the slow field from the auto attacking makes it much easier to land your Q. So with the stat adjustment on this patch not affecting the sticking power, Cho is just as strong as he was before. And with Darius, one of his slightly more challenging lanes, being hit with a light nerf this patch, he's the safest blind pick that you can take top lane. This is largely due to the combination of his passive, Doran's Shield, and Second Wind, which gives him insane sustain. Even against the most poke-heavy top laners, this makes it easy to survive. Against melee champs, it means that you can constantly trade aggressively since you'll just heal up much of the damage you take between trades. Landing Q's relatively small knockup can be hard to land during a teamfight, but as soon as you do hit one, it's all over for your opponents. The knockup and slow allows you to catch up to your target, and once you start autoing them, the constant slows from Frostfire Gauntlet make it so that you'll be able to land your follow-up Qs that much more easily. In general, the main use you'll get out of W is as a follow-up to your Q, to ensure that your opponent can't immediately flash or dash away as they land. But it's also a super impactful but often underrated teamfight ability. Most champs in the game don't have access to ranged AoE interrupts, so having one on a tank who can use it right in the middle of a fight means that you can instantly stop channels like Katarina or Fiddlesticks ultimates, up to 650 units away. And if you don't know what 650 units look like, that's Caitlyn's auto attack range. Yep, let that sink in. His E does both flat and percentage-based damage, so it works for helping you take down pretty much any target, squishy or tanky, and since it slows, it helps give you even more sticking power. Once you're on someone, it's extremely hard for them to get away. To put icing on the cake, as Cho'Gath grows, they start to cover a larger AoE, meaning that you can potentially pelt multiple targets in a teamfight. Cho's ult is pretty unique for a tank, as it doesn't actually give him any CC or gap closing ability. Instead, the stats it gives help make him a much harder monster to deal with. Early on, make sure to stack it as fast as you can, usually on the minion wave. It's better to use it on minions and just get on the cooldown again, rather than sitting and waiting for a chance to use it on a champion that may never come. Also, when a dragon is coming up soon, be sure to have Feast available. You'll do more damage than even a max level smite, and the stacks you get from epic monsters don't even cap. When teamfighting, you'll generally want to get to the backline and gobble up the carries, providing CC and disruption. But remember that the huge chunk of true damage means that you can also help bring champs that may be diving your own backline, even their tanks. Here's a couple of tips for Cho's laning. Try to trade frequently, either directly on your opponent or just by harassing them with your E as you auto minions. The poke damage is nice, and the slow sets you up to land a Q if you're looking to go for a more aggressive trade. But be careful about spamming your Q and W since it's pretty easy to go out of mana. Use those sparingly and instead rely on your E for the majority of your trading in lane. The low mana cost on E means you'll easily make the mana back with your passive just from clearing minion waves. Due to the sustain from his passive and the damage he gets from his E, Cho'Gath is actually an incredibly strong and even oppressive laner to deal with. In fact, he's been one of the go-to champs to shut down hyper-scaling melee carries like Jax for years now, just due to how consistently he can do it. And that brings us to our question of the day. What champ do you think is the most oppressive to lane against? This is open to all classes and roles, not strictly top laners. Be sure to let us know your answers in the comments down below. Now let's get back to the list. Camille has been dominating high elo for a bit too long now, and her influence has been slowly trickling down through the ladder. But there's still no nerfs in sight, so abuse her while you can. While mastering Camille takes a good deal of practice, once you do, she's a nearly untouchable laner. Her passive makes her literally take no damage in these short bursty trades, with Q's movement speed allowing you to skirt away before your opponent even has a chance to damage your health bar. Q is your primary damage source during fights, but make sure you aren't just button mashing. It's really important to time the second cast so that you get the bonus damage upgraded to true damage. You'll also want to learn to move between attacks so that you can make the most out of the movement speed to chase down your targets. More than any other part of her kit, Camille's W is what makes her so lane dominant. The poke alone is already pretty strong for a melee champ, but the fact that it heals her means that she can easily build a health lead as she chips away at the other laner while sustaining herself. And since it slows, most champs won't be able to try and move up and do anything about it. E gives you a way to close the gap, and with the stun and attack speed it gives you, really helps you win the more aggressive and extended trades. But be careful about using it constantly. If you're playing aggro all laning phase and the enemy jungler shows up, you won't have any way to escape if you used E to go in. One nice thing about the E is that you can shoot out the hook towards a wall before you're hit by CC, and if the hook connects to terrain, it'll just pull you to safety, regardless of almost any hooks, stuns, or other immobilizing effects that your opponents have landed on you. While your ult can definitely be used when dueling somebody in a 1v1, the strength it brings doesn't really come from the mediocre damage it gives you on hit. The big thing is the split second of untargetability that can help you dodge incoming damage or, more importantly, CC if you time it well. Aside from dueling strength, it's also a great catching tool. During lane phase, if your opponent is hugging tower and respecting you too much for you to try and solo kill them, you can instead shove the wave in and look to roam mid and use your ult to punish the enemy mid laner for overextending, even if they're only a bit away from their tower. In teamfights, you'll want to use your ult on a carry that's in range of your teammates. Even if your target has allies nearby, your team can use your ult's knockback as a small window of opportunity to blow up the caught out champ and easily turn a fight into a win. Again though, Camille is a very difficult champion to learn, so you'll want to be watching our guides on her. Make sure to sub to the channel so you don't miss out on future tips and tricks content specifically around this champion. Now, for the junglers, our first choice is Hecarim. Though he hits his strongest power spike in the mid game, his fast and healthy clear means that he can still provide a pretty decent amount of early pressure. Picking up just a couple of early kills is enough to let you snowball and become impossible for the enemy team to deal with. His Q's constant AoE damage gives him fast clear, as well as most of his damage against champs, especially since it helps to give constant Spellblade procs once you complete your Divine Sunderer. Since it's such a spammable AoE ability, you can also use Q to do multiple camps at a time, namely Raptors and Red Buff. Also Gromp and Blue Buff. Just kite the camps to the midway point where neither resets, and you'll have an insanely quick clear. Just be careful about doing this early on, as the trade-off is you'll be left with very low HP and won't be able to gank or fight for scuttles. But if you won't be interacting with other champs, this is for sure worth doing. W provides a lot of sustain during your jungle clear, but it becomes really OP when it's time to teamfight. What some people don't realize is that it heals Hecarim for all damage enemies inside take from any source. So if the entire enemy team is sitting in your W's aura, and your team is constantly dishing out damage, you'll be as hard to bring down as any other tank. His E is simple enough mechanically since it's just a movement speed increase and a modified auto attack. Just make sure to get behind your opponent and charge them back to your allies. Once you have your ult, your ganks are practically inescapable, regardless of flash being up for your foes or not. To execute ganks post 6, you'll start things off by charging at your opponents with E. If they have flash up, ram them with E, and immediately ult behind them after they flash to fear them into your teammates. Never lead with ult on targets that have flash available. In teamfights, your job is to basically dive in, disrupt, and isolate one carry to kill. To do this, you'll start out by ramping up your E to close the gap, use ult to fear and scatter the enemy team, and then use the charge portion of E to knock a vulnerable target away from the rest of their team, and preferably towards your own. While Nunu is technically nerfed on 11.2, it's barely even a slap on the wrist. If you build into boots of swiftness over tank boots, it more than enough makes up for the lost movement speed, though you can still build into tank boots options if you need to. Aside from that, the 30 HP won't really be missed. Most people hate Nunu for his extreme, no thinking required jungle clear, ganks, and even ability to solo dragon as soon as it spawns. His passive and E give him great AoE damage for a quick and speedy clear, while Q gives him so much sustain that you'll rarely even find a Nunu on the map without full HP. His W turns you from an immobile slug of a champion into a speed racer, and allows you to gank lanes even when your opponents have wards down if they're pushed too far up. Just remember to not let go of the snowball if your opponents are behind minions, because as soon as you let go of it, any unit it hits will cause it to explode. Instead of the standard hard CC and ult that most tanks come with, Nunu's turns him almost into a control mage. The ramping slow and potential damage can be a great way to force the enemy team to scramble. Though you'll generally want to use it on the enemy backline to threaten their carries, you can also stand on your own carries, as the huge burst of damage can even threaten to kill the tankier bruisers that are attempting to take out your own backline. When it comes time to gank, W's Rolling Snowball is extremely good at punishing overextended opponents. Even if they have flash available, there's a good chance that you'll clip them with it. And even if you don't, you're usually able to stick to them with your E afterward. Make sure to use your phase rush movement speed to reposition behind your opponents, and then plant yourself with your ult to ensure they can't escape. Nunu has shown up in a lot of our videos for quite some time now, and with Riot's solution to him being so OP is just a nerf that's this light, we don't think that he'll actually be changing anytime soon. He's one of the easiest champs in the game to pick up and play, so all you really need to do to get wins is make the right decisions in Pantheon and macro. And those just so happen to be the most teachable concepts in League, so if you're struggling with those concepts and want to get better, visit us at ProGuides.com. We got top tier challenger coaches that can help you learn how to abuse Nunu and specifically learn those jungle paths so that you can play like a challenger player. Next up for our mid laners, we'll start off with Pantheon. As we predicted, the small nerfs he got on 11.1 didn't really change much, so he's still dominating as a mid laner. He has strong laning, good roaming, and he scales into both split pushing and team fighting later on in the game. His passive lets you choose what you need to empower depending on what a given situation calls for. But in general, anytime you're looking for an aggressive trade, you'll want to use Empower W for the instant press the attack proc. Q gives you the bulk of your damage during trades, AoE damage for thinning out minion waves, and even decent poke, and since it has such a low mana cost, you can just practically spam it non-stop without running out of mana. Look to trade as much as you can with it, especially against other melee champs. If you're using the ranged cast to poke enemies that are hanging back, try to avoid throwing it through the minions, since it does half damage after passing through its first target. W's surprisingly high range of 600 means that you can easily close the gap to jump on opponents that want to move up and farm. Since the ability is also a point-and-click stun, it means that you pretty much have foolproof setup for jungle ganks. Panth as a whole is very mechanically easy, but his E does take a bit of know-how to get the most out of. When trading in lane, a lot of players simply mash their keyboard when they go in with Pantheon, spamming all their spells, and E included. Instead, use your E when your opponent is going to do the most damage to you. Once you get to the teamfight portion of the game, the nigh invincibility means that you can dive in on a squishy carry, burst them down, and then survive no matter how much damage is thrown at you as long as you time it well and use it from a good angle. While most lane bully ults give them a way to increase their kill pressure in their own lane, with Pantheon, once you have it, you instead look to extend your lead to the rest of the map. Most times this means you'll be turning your sights towards bottom lane, where you'll look to dive, preferably with your jungle, and snowball the rest of your team, picking up kills, plates, and ideally some early dragons. Out of laning phase, your ult allows you to make picks and set your team up in the side lanes without even using TP. If the enemy team sends someone to match you, you can use your ult to force a fight with numbers advantage elsewhere. And if they try to force Baron, your ult allows you to easily get there before your team is forced to start a fight. And our second choice for the mid lane is Seraphine. She's got solid laning, but you'll want to avoid early fights with her, since her cooldowns are pretty long, and she shines more in team fights rather than these scrappy skirmishes. Q gives you trading power and wave clear in the lane, and in team fights, once you pick up some AP, the execute damage can make you a pretty potent threat. W shield and movement speed can help keep you out of harm's way, with a double cast being a good emergency escape button when you're being ganked. E slow and potential root or stun can make it much easier to land the rest of your damage, but don't be over aggressive with it in lane. The cooldown is decently long for a basic ability, and once it's down, you're wide open to being ganked for quite a bit, especially if the wave is in a bad spot. Once you have your ult, you have a huge chain of CC available with R and an echoed E, but you won't have crazy solo kill potential. Instead, you'll want to work with your teammates to secure the kills. During laning phase, you'll almost always use the echo portion of Seraphine's passive to double cast her Q, since that gives you the best wave clear. The W seal is pretty weak when you're on your own, making it only really worth using when you really need it to survive a gank or if you're being bursted down by a lane opponent, rather than just using it to sustain. A double cast of E can be helpful when you're receiving a gank, but it's pretty hard to land it by itself, so try to use it either after your jungle hits your opponent with their own CC, or at least applies red buff for the slow. Once you get to teamfights, Empower W really starts to shine. Since the effect stacks, you'll be applying a huge movement speed buff and shield to all of your allies, and the heal becomes a pretty potent one once you're near the entire team. If your W is coming up in the middle of a fight, you'll always want to try and cycle your spellcast so that you can make sure that is the one that's echoed. The second part of your passive may seem pretty lackluster early game, but like your W, it really starts to come online in teamfights too. A fully stacked 20 notes gives you an auto range of 1025. Meaning you can snipe the enemy backline without even having to be close to danger. And yes, this also works for chipping down towers during sieges. Moving down to the bot lane, it shouldn't surprise anyone that our first pick is yet again Jhin. At this point, he's just been the best AD carry in the game for months, and there's still somehow no nerfs in sight. Jhin's Q gives him some extra pushing power, something he otherwise lacks early game due to his limited attack speed and unique 4-shot ammo system. If you use it at the right time, a Q that kills 3 minions and then lands on one of your lane opponents can do insane damage. W's root makes you one of the few AD carries that can actually initiate a fight, but since it's pretty hard to land, it's preferable to use it as a follow-up to an ally's engage rather than opening the play. E's traps can help secure bush control, which is a pretty huge part in overall control of the lane. They can also be used to help shove in waves fast, but their most important use is to help you escape from jungle ganks before they even happen. The ability to reveal and slow incoming junglers means you'll be able to make it back to your tower before they're even close to pulling off a gank. Once you have ult, you're able to impact fights without even being within a screen's range of the opponents. You can use it to finish off low HP enemies attempting to flee, participate in fights you'd otherwise not be able to reach, or just open up with your ult to slow out of position opponents if you have allies close enough to follow up and pick them off. One quick tip before you move on to our second pick: while Jhin is definitely a lane bully, you'll want to wait until you reset and pick up a few components before you start playing aggressively, unless they just walk into those 4th shot Qs on minions, and then, go for it. With Hurricane being buffed on this patch, Kaisa is an even stronger pick than before. She's generally a scaling hyper carry, but she can easily be played as part of a kill lane with an aggressive support. Her passives, on-hit damage, and 5-stack proc give her a nice bit of mixed damage, even with a full AD crit build, making it really hard for tanks to stand up to her damage. Q's missiles help with pushing lanes and last-hitting minions early on, with them becoming a big portion of your damage during fights with other champions once you got it evolved. Just make sure that you're fighting out of a minion wave so that all of your missiles hit champions when you're looking to trade. Your W gives you a way to burst opponents fast, but the slow, clumsy missile can usually be easily dodged if you're just shooting it out at random. Instead, use it after your support lands their CC before you run in and start autoing. Aside from fighting, the super long range makes it a great way to scout out lane bushes for cheesy lane ganks, and to check if the enemy team is trying to sneak Dragon or Baron when you don't have wards down. Kinda think of it like an Ashe Hawk. Meanwhile, E's movement speed can help you evade some skill shots, with the attack speed it grants after giving you insane DPS. The ability becomes a truly OP tool later into the game once you evolve it, as the stealth gives you tons of kiting and outplay potential. Just remember, you can't auto while you're using supercharge, so don't make my mistake of face planting into my opponent while doing so. Much like the rest of her kit, Kaisa's ult lets her adapt to various situations. You can use it to retreat away from danger, reposition for more optimal DPS, chase a fleeing opponent to finish them off, or if you're feeling extra bold, you can ult in with your divers on any target that they CC. Just be careful about that last option, because once you're in there, it's a fight to the death. Now for the best lane in the game, supports. Starting off with Thresh. He's a unique pick, able to make game-winning plays at pretty much all stages of the game, while he also has the potential to peel multiple threats off of his backline. He isn't necessarily weaker or stronger at any point in the game, and is instead limited by your mechanics and decision-making. Most supports tend to specialize in one area, but Thresh's grab bag of abilities let him make picks, peel for his team, disrupt enemies, and save allies. Fishing for hooks with his Q can make crucial picks that open up your team to securing objectives, but team fighting is where a great Thresh player can truly make a difference. One pretty important thing to think about on Thresh is how you're supposed to position in teamfights, depending on the team comps on both sides. In some games, it may be your job to dive right into the fight, using Flay and ult to knock out the enemy AD carries. But let's say you have immobile carries on your side of the team, and the enemy team has a Zac looking to jump in on your backline. Now, your job is to sit between Zac and your carries at all times, and use your Flay to interrupt him. But if you swap Zac out for a champ that can't really be peeled like Olaf or Vi, then you want to sit even further back and just lantern your carry to safety. There's one thing I'd like to point out about your rune choice. Guardian is an overall better option, especially for laning, but if you're at risk of being blown up by a high damage lane, or you're just the primary source of engage for your team, Aftershock is also an option. And to round out our list, we have Leona. When it comes to CC-focused, engaged supports, she's just the leader of the pack, and for good reason. Her passive adds a lot of damage to her combo as long as your AD carry is hitting your enemies with you. And that, along with her ability to lock your target in place, make her pair amazingly well with aggressive carries like Jhin, Kaisa, and Tristana. Most tanky supports can at least have their engage blocked by minions, but nope, not Leona. So once your opponent's flashes are down, you can force over and over any time that they step up to farm, making her an incredible champ if you're the type of player that likes to snowball hard in the laning phase. Q short cooldown means that once you're on a target, you can just repeatedly CC them until an ally is able to take them out. You can also use it to constantly disrupt enemy threats that are trying to reach your backline. Usually when a champion is as annoying as Leona, you'll want to focus them down just so they can stop being so disruptive. But thanks to her W, she is almost impossible to burst, at least for a few seconds. But it's not just the fact that Leona's engage is uninhibited by minions that makes it so easy to engage non-stop with her. It's also her crazy range that she can reach opponents from. Her E's range comes in at 900 units, but if that's not enough, her ult can be cast from up to 1200 units away. That's 2 times Ashe's auto attack range. So if you can force your opponents to flash early on in lane, you should be looking to force hard every time they walk up to farm when your ult is up. Outside of lane phase, this ridiculous ult range means that you can make tons of picks. A lot of Leonas sit on their cooldowns waiting for a fight to break out around objectives, but instead, you should just be looking to ult mispositioning enemies every time your ult is off cooldown. So to recap, godly tankiness and pick potential that outranges almost all other engages in the game. Yeah, what more could you want?
And that's it for OP Pick or Ban 11.2 edition. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to sub to the channel so you never miss out on our meta guides. And remember to let us know what champ you think is oppressive as a laner in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to check out our Discord in the description box as well, because we got giveaways going on, you can hang out and make friends, and I'll even be streaming some of my meal prep on there later. So come learn how to cook like a Minnesotan. Anyway, that's it for the video. So as always, best of luck on the Rift, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.